Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, October 30th, 2024, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today will reach 71.1 degrees, with a low of 48.4, so it's a great day to enjoy some outdoor activities. Coming up on Alex's News, we'll explore how the latest pre-election jobs report might influence voter decisions at the polls. We'll also dive into the record-breaking campaign spending surrounding California's rent control debate. Plus, we'll examine the potential impact of the European Union's new tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and how they could reshape the automotive market. Stay tuned for these stories and more on Alex's News. We're now turning to a story that's capturing national attention as we approach the 2024 presidential election. The final jobs report before Election Day is set to be released in just 2 days, on November 1st. Joining us to discuss this crucial economic indicator is our economic correspondent, Ethan. Ethan, what can you tell us about the expectations for this report?
Thanks, Grace. This upcoming jobs report is shaping up to be one of the most distorted we've seen in years. According to ABC News and the Economic Times, economists are anticipating that several significant factors could dramatically impact the October job growth numbers.
What are these factors, Ethan?
Well, Grace, we're looking at a perfect storm of events. First, we have the recent hurricanes Helene and Milton, which caused significant disruptions in several states. On top of that, there's an ongoing strike by Boeing machinists. These events combined could potentially reduce October job growth by anywhere from 60,000 to 100,000 jobs.
That's a substantial impact. How does this compare to recent months?
It's a stark contrast, Grace. Experts are estimating that only about 120,000 new jobs were added in October. To put that in perspective, it's less than half of the 254,000 jobs added in September. The Labor Department has noted that the Boeing machinist strike and a smaller hotel workers strike alone reduced job growth by 41,000 in October.
With such a significant drop, Ethan, how is this expected to affect the unemployment rate?
Interestingly, Grace, despite these temporary setbacks, the unemployment rate is expected to remain relatively low at 4.1%. This suggests that the job market is still quite resilient, supported by healthy consumer spending, even in the face of high interest rates set by the Federal Reserve.
Now, Ethan, we're just days away from the presidential election. How might this report impact the political landscape?
That's a great question, Grace. The economy has been a central issue in the presidential campaign, and this distorted report has raised concerns about its potential political implications. It's worth noting that some Republican allies of Donald Trump have questioned the credibility of monthly jobs reports. For instance, Senator Marco Rubio has made claims about data manipulation, though these claims are baseless.
How do economists respond to these claims of data manipulation?
Mainstream economists and former Labor Department officials strongly support the integrity of the data collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS. They emphasize its transparency and methodical revision process. ABC News reports that revisions to job counts, such as the expected downgrade of total jobs by 818,000 from last March, are part of the normal data gathering process and not evidence of manipulation.
Speaking of the Federal Reserve, how might this jobs report affect their decision-making?
The Fed is set to meet on November 7th, just 2 days after the election. Most economists expect the Fed to reduce its benchmark interest rate by a quarter point if the report indicates that hiring remained healthy, excluding the temporary impacts of the hurricanes and strikes. This would follow a half-point cut in September.
Thank you, Ethan, for this comprehensive overview. It's clear that this jobs report will be closely watched by both voters and policymakers alike.
Absolutely, Grace. It's a crucial economic indicator, especially given its timing just before the election. We'll be watching closely as the numbers are released on November 1st.
Thanks again, Ethan. And that's our first story for today, October 30th, 2024. Stay tuned for more news after the break. We're turning now to a hot topic in California politics: campaign spending on propositions for the upcoming 2024 election. Joining us to discuss this is our political correspondent, Chloe. Chloe, what can you tell us about the propositions drawing the most attention and money?
Thanks, Grace. The spotlight is firmly on Propositions 33 and 34, both of which deal with rent control and local housing policies. According to reporting from the Press Democrat, these two propositions alone have attracted more than half of the $350 million raised for all 10 ballot measures this election cycle.
That's a significant amount. How does this compare to previous elections?
While it's a substantial sum, it's actually less than what we saw in 2022. That year, nearly $700 million was spent on sports betting propositions. However, the focus this year on housing-related measures underscores the ongoing concerns about California's housing crisis.
Can you break down what these propositions aim to do?
Certainly. Proposition 33 seeks to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995, which would give cities more authority to impose rent limits. Proposition 34, on the other hand, targets a nonprofit organization that's sponsoring Prop 33.
Who are the major players contributing to these campaigns?
The two main contributors are the California Apartment Association and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Together, they account for more than half of all contributions related to ballot measures. The California Apartment Association has invested $11 million against Prop 33 and $3.1 million in support of Prop 34, totaling at least $131 million this election cycle. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation has contributed over $24 million since October in support of Prop 33 and against Prop 34, bringing their total to nearly $65 million.
That's a lot of money. Are there any other significant contributors?
Yes, the California Association of Realtors is the third largest contributor, having put in $19 million to fight Prop 33.
How are these propositions polling so far?
Recent polling shows that Prop 33 has 42% support, with 54% opposed, while Prop 34 has 47% support, with 49% opposed. It's worth noting that these numbers could shift as we get closer to Election Day, which is just 6 days away on November 5th.
What are the main arguments for and against these propositions, particularly Prop 33?
Proponents of Prop 33 argue that it would provide relief to renters, give local governments more control over housing policies, and help stabilize communities. On the other hand, opponents contend that it would reduce housing supply, discourage new construction, and potentially harm small landlords and homeowners.
Have there been any studies on the long-term impacts of rent control policies in California?
Yes, there have. Studies on rent control policies in major California cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles have shown largely negative long-term economic impacts. These include reduced housing supply, increased rent prices for non-controlled units, gentrification, reduced property maintenance, and decreased tenant mobility.
So it seems the effects are quite complex. What's the overall consensus on rent control as a solution to housing affordability?
While rent control may provide short-term benefits to current tenants, the overwhelming evidence suggests that it doesn't make housing more affordable in the long term. Instead, it tends to reduce the supply of rental housing, lead to misallocation of housing units, and fail to target the benefits to those who need them most.
As we approach Election Day, what can we expect in terms of campaign spending?
Given the significance of these propositions in shaping California's housing policies, we can expect campaign spending to increase even further in the final days leading up to the election.
Thank you, Chloe, for this comprehensive overview of the campaign spending on California propositions. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on how this develops in the coming days.
You're welcome, Grace. It's definitely a story worth watching closely.
Here are some other headlines. A devastating flash flood in eastern Spain has claimed at least 63 lives. The floods, triggered by intense rainstorms, have affected the Valencia and Castilla-La Mancha regions, turning streets into rivers and disrupting infrastructure. Emergency services, including over 1,000 soldiers, have been deployed for rescue efforts. The U.S. Supreme Court has rejected Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s push to remove his name from ballots in Wisconsin and Michigan. Kennedy, who suspended his presidential campaign and endorsed Donald Trump, argued that keeping his name on the ballots infringed upon his First Amendment rights. State laws and practical considerations prevented the removal of his name. Israel's Knesset has passed legislation banning UNRWA operations in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. UNRWA's chief warns this will lead to more suffering for Palestinians, as the agency provides critical services to 2.3 million people in Gaza. The ban is set to take effect in 90 days, raising concerns about a humanitarian crisis and lack of alternative aid. David DePape, who attacked Paul Pelosi in 2022, has been sentenced to life in prison without parole in a state trial. This sentence will run concurrently with his 30-year federal prison term. The judge stated his intention that DePape never be released from prison. The Taliban government in Afghanistan has imposed new restrictions on women, prohibiting them from praying loudly or reciting the Quran in the presence of other women. This directive expands existing limitations on women's rights, sparking international backlash and criticism from human rights organizations. We turn now to a significant development in international trade. The European Union has finalized higher customs duties on electric vehicles imported from China. To discuss this, we're joined by our economics correspondent, Ethan. Ethan, can you give us an overview of this decision?
Certainly, Grace. According to reporting from ABC News, the European Union has just implemented substantially higher customs duties on electric vehicles, or EVs, imported from China. This decision comes after an 8-month investigation that concluded Chinese EV manufacturers are benefiting from significant government subsidies. The tariffs were finalized today, October 30, 2024, and are part of a broader trade dispute between the EU and China.
That's interesting, Ethan. Can you tell us more about these tariffs? Are they the same for all Chinese manufacturers?
No, they actually vary by manufacturer, Grace. As KVIAABC7 has reported, BYD will face a 17% tariff, Geely 18.8%, and the state-owned SAIC will see a hefty 35.3% duty. Other Chinese EV makers, including Volkswagen and BMW's Chinese operations, will face a 20.7% tariff. Interestingly, Tesla has been given a unique rate of 7.8%.
Those are significant differences. What's driving this decision by the EU?
Well, Grace, it's largely due to the rapid increase in market share of Chinese-built EVs in the EU. According to the Sun Chronicle, their share has jumped from just 3.9% in 2020 to a whopping 25% by September 2023. This surge has raised concerns about unfair competition and potential threats to European jobs and green technology production.
I see. How long will these tariffs be in place, Ethan?
The duties are set to remain in force for 5 years, Grace. However, there's a possibility of resolution before that. The EU and China are currently engaged in negotiations focused on potential price commitments. This would involve carmakers agreeing to minimum selling prices for their EVs in Europe.
How has the European auto industry reacted to these tariffs?
Interestingly, Grace, many European auto industry leaders and even Germany have opposed these tariffs. They're concerned about potential retaliation from China and the impact on European companies with operations in China. It's a complex situation, with various stakeholders having different perspectives.
And what about China's response to this move?
China hasn't taken this lying down, Grace. They've launched anti-dumping investigations into European exports of brandy and pork. They've also imposed provisional tariffs on French and other European brandies. There's even talk of raising tariffs on gasoline-powered vehicles with large engines. It's clear that this could escalate into a broader trade dispute.
That's quite a response. How might this affect consumers, Ethan?
Well, Grace, the immediate impact on car prices might not be as significant as one might expect. Chinese carmakers could potentially absorb the costs through lower profits. However, the EU argues that allowing unfair practices could lead to less competition and higher prices in the long term. It's a balancing act between short-term affordability and long-term market health.
Interesting. Are Chinese automakers looking at any alternatives to deal with these tariffs?
Yes, they are, Grace. Some Chinese automakers, like BYD and Chery, are planning to establish production facilities within the EU. This would allow them to circumvent the tariffs and be closer to the market. It's a strategy we've seen in other industries facing similar trade barriers.
Thank you, Ethan, for that comprehensive overview of this complex situation. It's clear that this will have far-reaching implications for the global electric vehicle market.
You're welcome, Grace. It's certainly a situation we'll be watching closely as it develops.
Indeed. Thanks again, Ethan, for your insights on this story. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 3.5, the Perplexity API, and the Google Cloud Text-to-Speech API. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.